I just want to say welcome again to everyone, and thanks to you all for coming, to the readers for reading, and to June. I'm Claire Kelly with NeWest Press. You heard my bio. I don't have to go into any more details. We're on Zoom tonight for the mystery thriller Noir reading. As June said, we will be recording the reading, but feel free to leave your cameras on so that the readers aren't reading into the void, so to speak. But microphone off. After all 4 authors read, we'll be having a Q&A. So there's a chat box, and feel free to throw your questions in the chat box, and I will read them out loud, and you may get answers from them, who knows? I'm coming to you from Edmonton. Our readers are in Alberta and BC, and I just want to acknowledge that the lands we are gathering on are the traditional gathering places for many Indigenous peoples. We honor, respect, and celebrate the history, languages, ceremonies, and cultures of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call these territories home. I don't just like to say the territorial acknowledgement and then move on. This weekend in Alberta, right near Edmonton, there was a protest at Grace Life Church. I'm not going to get into the protest stuff, but some of the people trespassed on the land of the Enoch Cree Nation, and they vandalized Chief Billy Morin's property. And this led me to want to talk about an app I've been using to learn about Amiskwichi, Weskaigan, where I live. It's basically an app where you can find out the territory or the land you're living on, whose land it is. It's an app called Whose Land. It's a good starting place to grow from if you are unsure of where you're living. So yeah, I just got the app on Google Play, so Google Download or whatever it's called. I'm sure you can find it in a lot of app stores. It was free. Up first tonight is Mark Lisac. Mark is originally from Hamilton, Ontario, and worked as a journalist in Regina before moving to Edmonton to join the Canadian Press as a reporter-editor. He was the provincial affairs columnist at the Edmonton Journal. His first novel, Where the Bodies Lie, was shortlisted for the Arthur Ellis Award. That's been renamed, and I can't remember the name right now, for Best First Novel. Image Decay is a prequel to that story, which also takes place in an oil-rich Canadian province just east of the Rockies, and which also is rich with political intrigue. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, I assume you can hear me. I have the mute button off. Okay, that's the book, Image Decay. I'm going to read some excerpts from the second chapter, leaving out a few bits so as not to give away too much of what happens in the first chapter. In the first chapter, a photographer and camera shop owner named Jack Ostrowski does something rather silly and probably criminal on a iron bridge high above a river flowing through a large city somewhere in Western Canada. And he has written to his lawyer before doing that. And the second chapter picks up with his lawyer walking into the office next morning and getting a surprise envelope delivered to him. And it goes like this. George Rabani liked being a lawyer. He did not like being an informal social worker, which his practice required on certain days. He thought people were enormously and unfailingly interesting. He saw in them a vast field of bleak self-interest interrupted by oases of compassion and generosity. He enjoyed talking to them. He found most of them a never-ending source of delightful surprise. They constantly invented quirks or stumbled into improbable predicaments. Sometimes they strode into those situations willfully. Sometimes they wandered in as if driving mistakenly onto a road that petered out, turning suddenly to gravel and then to dirt. He helped when he could, but he did not like dealing with people who seemed essentially incapable of understanding their situation. Jack Ostrowski was on the border. Rabani knew Ostrowski was smart. He was not sure what Ostrowski understood and what he did not. The previous day's incident on the Highview Bridge could result in an order for a psychiatric assessment. It might be kept quiet instead, with Ostrowski simply being calmed down and told to go tend to his store. Rabbani thought there was too much behind the incident to go away, and the episode suggested some capacity for violence. He had walked into the office seeing his image reflected on the plate glass of a building front and the door. The pictures flickered past like frames of old movie film. He had become used to his pockmarked face and the slight muffin bulge at his beltline. After nearly 2 years, he was almost used to seeing that image entering one of the capital's top law offices. Saying good morning to Julia at the front desk had brought him back from doubt. He was a lawyer with a promising future, in a good firm, in a city with cheap gray buildings and a downtown filled with panhandlers and with haggard, blank-faced teenagers catching a bus to school. But the city had plenty of money. It also had many people whose hidden needs or bad judgments eventually dragged them into law offices. The variety of their inspirations and failings promised him years of education. Mere entertainment was not enough. He wanted to learn. Rabbani was not a cynic or a voyeur. He was a student of humanity. Mostly he saw at least as much reason for hope in his clients as he did weakness. In his darkest moments, he worried that he studied his clients as a way of learning about himself. People were not so different from one another, yet they were different enough. Some were lawyers and some were clients. Julia, of the perfectly coiffed hair and expensively understated dress, had given him her warm but utterly dispassionate smile and handed him a large brown envelope. He saw the previous day's date and Ostrowski scrawled on the upper left corner. The delivery in itself was worrisome. It indicated that whatever Ostrowski had thought he was doing on the bridge, he had planned it. Rabbani tore the end of the envelope neatly and slipped out a thin sheaf of paper. It was going to take some time. He stepped outside to get a cup of coffee, double cream and double sugar. He asked Julia to hold any calls, returned to his office, and settled into the massive chair that he thought was one of the best perks of working at a good firm. Then he began to read. I'm typing this on an Underwood from the mid-1930s. I like old Royals too, but this is a solid machine and has been my favorite for a long time. It's been such a long time that I can't remember. This machine is real. You can see the action. You can see the parts move. Press the concave button with the light letter printed on a black background, and the long metal arm swings up from its resting place. It curves through the small space in its assigned arc. The black fabric ribbon lifts, and the end of the metal arm with the neatly cast letter on the end hits it. You can hear the thwack. The fabric transfers a shape of ink onto the rolled paper. Sometimes I hold the key down to keep the metal arm in place. The alloy kisses the ink-soaked cloth. It's the moment of creation. Yes, it's a mechanical and chemical process, just like a photograph, but you choose what image to put on the paper. That makes it creation. So does the transfer of the ink. A message appears on the paper. At that moment, nothing turns into something. It stays there. It can stay for centuries, not like an arrangement of electrons in a computer. I have an old Oliver, too, named after a guy from Canada, and a Remington noiseless from 1938. They're more like investments, and I keep them hidden. If I have to, I'll sell one of them to buy a bottle of good booze when I turn 85. But the Underwood is what I write with, like when I have to send a note to a lawyer once every 10 years or so. And Madman would try to explain himself, which is what I'm doing now. Becker stole my photos. Maybe not technically. He didn't break into my shop one night and carry off cases. He might as well have. They said I walked off my old photographer's job with a government Hasselblad. Total bull. Manchester said I could have it. It was sort of a gold watch deal, a present for years of loyal service. But after I left, they wanted it back. I'd sold it by then and was still short of money. Becker brokered the deal to have my photos donated to the archives. I could have sold them for a lot more than the Hasselblad was worth. He knew that. It was worth it to me then to get them off my back. I was getting worried about proper storage of the negatives and prints anyway. They last a long time, but need proper care. But here's where it went wrong. They didn't let me call the collection first. It was pick up the boxes and go. The lawyer in Becker's department said I agreed to sell the collection, and there was nothing in the agreement that said I could take anything out. Becker's a cabinet minister. He could have let me have a look through. But no, he had it in for me for some reason. That was bad enough. I figured I could live with it. The photos would get stored somewhere. A few of the personal shots I took on the side when I was on government work might make it into a display case at the museum. Everyone wants to see candid photos of Manchester, that old con man, and the collection of metal dwarfs he pretended helped him run the government, right? There were some nice ones of historic oil wells too. That wasn't to be. I've heard someone has started snooping through the collection. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Becker himself. Then I've heard someone has been assigned to look into new technology that may make it possible to transfer everything into copies on a computer. It's got something to do with changing everything from physical copies to electronic simulations, the way that's happened with turning vinyl records into CDs. Instead of chemical film or grains of silver nitrate, pictures get turned into a bunch of ones and zeros in a computer. The bright boys call this digitization, I hear. You may think it sounds far-fetched, but I'll tell you, when I got to Hollywood in the late 1940s, television sounded like a novelty. 5 years later, it started destroying the movies. And once real things get turned into electricity, they can spread all over. They could decide to digitize everything and put it on this thing they call the internet. I never agreed to that. I agreed to let the photos go into the archives. If they go that way, their idea isn't to preserve anything. It's to chew it up and spit it out into garbage. They want to turn silver nitrate and paper into electrons. It's a perversion. Photographs are meant to record a passing moment and keep it forever. Converting them into an arrangement of electrons in a computer explodes them. It destroys them like an atomic bomb. You can't take something meant to last through time and make it ephemeral. You didn't think I knew words like that, did you? Oh yeah. When I lived in Hollywood, I drank now and then with screenwriters, back when they weren't afraid of words and ideas. Then there's the invasion of privacy. There are photos in that collection that aren't meant to be seen, at least not in my lifetime. Why didn't I destroy them, you say? Because they happened and can't be erased. Because I could not bear to see them erased from the record of life. But I thought they would be preserved out of sight, saved but unseen until it didn't matter anymore. Now it looks like someday they'll want to put those photographs on a computer network. God knows who might see them. It isn't meant to be. Becker is the culture minister. He could stop it. He won't. I'm going to make him stop. That's what I'm counting on anyway. By tomorrow, this should all be cleared away. Come and see me in my shop. If I'm not out in the front, I'll be in the time machine. If I'm not there, I'll be in jail, or maybe the river. Emotional, but not insane, Rabbani decided. Disjointed enough to suggest a psychiatric exam. That probably depended on whether Becker chose to press charges. The cops wouldn't be happy about letting Ostrowski loose, but if the incident could be played as something closer to a potential suicide than to a crime, there was a chance. He put the 3 sheets of paper back into the envelope and put the envelope into his private file for cases he wanted to think about more before acting on them. Time machine. It didn't sound good, but he'd been a lawyer long enough now not to jump to conclusions.
Thanks, Mark. My hometown shares a digital archive with the town next to it. And one bored teenage summer, I spent going through the photos in the archive, and I got obsessed with this rich family's dog. Can't remember the family's name anymore, but every time I would like proofread that chapter, read that chapter, or hear you read it, that part, I think of the dog King. So a lovely little English setter. Yeah, so I know doesn't mean anything, but it's interesting how much even like smaller towns started digitizing their archives and what ended up in there, like personal photos of families. But thanks for reading, that was great. Everyone, remember, throw your questions in the chat box, and our authors will answer them, unless they don't want to. Our second reader tonight is Niall Howell. Niall was born and raised in Calgary, where he still resides. His short fiction has been published in the Feathertail Review and Freefall magazine, and he holds a Bachelor of Arts in English from Mount Royal University and a Bachelor of Education from the University of Calgary. He obsessively collects records and comics, which I also do. So one day we're gonna have to have a big chat about our comic book collection, especially. Only Pretty Damned is part of the Noon Attack First Fictions series. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me be a part of this cool thing. And yeah, congrats to the other authors here on their new release books as well. Very cool. So I'm reading to you from Only Pretty Damned, which you can see, if you look at the top, has a blurb from none other than the man himself, AJ Devlin here. This came out 2 years ago, almost to the day. So I think it was April 23rd was when we had the launch. So it's a toddler now, which is weird because it still feels new, but yeah, 2 years. I don't know. I'll have to, once the pandemic lifts, I'll have to take it to Chuck E. Cheese or something to celebrate. So it's I think of it as a noir novel, and it's a story that takes place in a traveling circus. It's moving around North America, the early 50s, and occasionally it dips back into the 1940s. But we get the story from my protagonist Toby, who used to be a headlining acrobat. But because of his involvement in an incident at the circus he's with, he's been grounded and he's been relegated to the role of clown, and he's stuck watching every night while Genevieve, his former performing partner and lover, continues to headline the bill with a new man in Toby's position. So he's got a chip on his shoulder because of this, and after certain events transpire, he decides he just needs to take matters into his own hands to right the wrongs that he feels the circus has thrown at him. And while this is happening, certain details from his past start to seep to the surface, and we start to get an understanding as to why he's such a bitter and perhaps dangerous as well person. So like I said, the bulk of it takes place in the 50s, but we have these sort of flashback chapters that dip back into the war years. And in these chapters, Toby isn't a clown. So in these flashback chapters, he's still a hotshot acrobat. So I'm going to be reading to you a section from one of those chapters today. And in the one we're about to take a look at, he's run into a bit of a problem in his life as an acrobat because he is grappling with alcoholism, which you would imagine would be a problem for an acrobat because it is a job that you need to be relatively sober for. Okay, I was 2 weeks cold turkey in Albuquerque. I was also celebrating 2 weeks without a good night's sleep and 2 weeks of being just about the most miserable person anyone had ever set eyes on. I was a mess. I was a pale, jittery mess who mumbled to himself and had puffy, dark bags under his eyes. I met Genevieve outside the Big Top 10 minutes before our set. Before coming to the Big Top, I drank a bunch of coffee and chewed a stick of gum to blanket my booze breath. We did our stretches. At that point, we hadn't slept in the same trailer for nearly a week. I guess I'd been whining and blubbering in my sleep every night the second I conked, when I managed to conk, that is. Genevieve had tried remedying it by sleeping with wads of cotton jammed in her ears, and that worked all right for a while until I started thrashing in my sleep. One night, I booted her while I was out, leaving a big fat bruise on her left thigh. She told me that when she woke up, I was kicking and flailing my arms about, and the tears were streaming from my closed eyes. After a repeat offense 2 nights later, we both agreed it would be best if I sought out different accommodations for a while. Roland offered me the circus's one vacant trailer, which had belonged to one Wally Jakes, and you can bet I had some choice words for that suggestion. Plan B was that I sleep on Roland's floor, so I opted for that. Beggars and choosers, right? Raised hand in raised hand, we ran into the Big Top, lighting the stubby wick on a tumultuous panorama of cheers. The race up the ladder was business as usual, moving in time to the beat of our music, high-tension horns and heroic twin bass drums. I felt great. I wasn't drunk, but the alcohol had calmed me. The band cut out when we reached the platform, leaving us with only a rolling snare drum. Genevieve grabbed her bar and she swung out. I heard a few gasps over the snare, nothing new. A moment later, I followed. The two of us took a few swings to get our rhythm, then we clicked. One clock with 2 mirroring pendulums. Genevieve set up for her first dismount, a fronted straddle and planche. She leapt, the snare halted. Gasps and squeals rose from the crowd. I caught her by the wrists. It was textbook. Cheers burst all around us, heat searing off of them. As I released her, it grabbed me. My head felt light, my arms felt gone. The fatigue that had been stalking me for weeks had finally made its big move. I blinked hard, trying to push it back. I opened my eyes to pure distortion. I opened my eyes and a snare drum I didn't even realize was rolling stopped dead. A somersaulting woman was coming at me. No, a smear was coming at me, fast. I flung my weightless arms out. I connected with something. Gasps and squeals rose from the crowd. They were different gasps and squeals than before. Screams followed. Lots and lots of screams followed. So I'm actually going to stop it there. Shorter section, but there it is. Only pretty damned. Thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Neil. I'm mad Noir Alley hasn't been on. It's not on because it's Oscar month. So I haven't watched any noirs lately, but I'm still obsessed with John Garfield. I'm not as obsessed with John Garfield right now as I am with baseball, but it's close.
Yeah, John Garfield's great. And the House of Un-American Activities was also obsessed with John Garfield for a stretch of time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He's a
And
man with many
he
fans.
was apparently a sweetheart. And they said even if he had gone to a communist meeting, he was just, he was a go along to get along kind of guy, which maybe describes communism as well a little bit,
Yeah.
so who knows.
I can see that for sure.
Yeah, thanks for reading.
Thank you.
Our third reader tonight is Derek. I call him Derek because that's what his email it says when I email him. DB Carew is how you'll find his books. DB is a crime fiction writer who was born in Newfoundland and Labrador. He now lives in Coquitlam, British Columbia. DB has worked at a forensic psychiatric hospital for over 20 years, and his experiences as a forensic social worker serve as inspiration for his Chris Ryder thrillers. The Weight of Blood, which he's reading from tonight, presumably, is the follow-up to The Killer Trail. Welcome, Derek. DB.
Thank you very much. And I do have a few thanks to just acknowledge. I want to thank, first of all, Claire for hosting this and for your production work with The Weight of Blood and everything you do at NeWest Press. And I want to thank Matt Bowes, the general manager, amazing general manager with NeWest Press. I want to thank Leslie Vermeer for the outstanding editing for The Weight of Blood, which I will be reading from, as well as Kate Hargreaves, who did the cover design for the book. I also want to thank AJ, Neil, and Mark for letting me be tagging on with you this evening. It's an honor. And thank you to Shelf Life Books for this event and this opportunity this evening. And thank you for people tuning in this evening. So as you mentioned, and as I mentioned, I'm going to be reading from The Weight of Blood. And in this book, social worker Chris Ryder begins working with a patient named Marvin Goodwin. And Marvin has been charged with the murder of an ice cream vendor and has been admitted at the Institute of Forensic Psychiatry for an assessment. And the more that Chris begins to learn about Marvin, the more he starts to question his involvement in that murder. And I'll be reading a passage from which introduces Chris to Marvin in chapters 4 and 5. Chris made his way to Alpha Unit to meet Dr. Stevenson. He would assist her in assessing Marvin's fitness to stand trial, whether Marvin could understand the basics of the court process, as well as his ability to communicate with his lawyer. Chris was hoping today's meeting would give him a phone number for a family member so he could find out background information about Marvin and what he had been doing in the days leading up to his arrest. That would help Marilyn with her report on Marvin for his next court date. Before his confrontation with Ray Owens, Chris had ventured onto Alpha Unit countless times without incident. Today, however, his body tensed, just as it had on every occasion since his clash with Ray. He waited for the anxiety to pass. Bracing himself, he unlocked the door of the unit and walked inside. Alpha Unit could accommodate 22 patients and had been designed with safety and cost effectiveness, not aesthetic purposes in mind. Patients' rooms consisted mainly of a bed, drawer set, and small writing table. Washrooms were shared. In the 3 common rooms, patients could watch TV, listen to music, and socialize. A locked door separated this area from the rest of the unit. On the other side of the unit, a large dining room was located next to the nursing station, where dietary staff delivered meals on large food trolleys. One could be forgiven for confusing the alpha and beta units as they looked like mirror images of each other, with off-white walls, blue flooring, and the same institutional equipment. Even the interview rooms were replicas of each other. Alpha was buzzing with activity, something Chris likened to organized chaos, as nurses prepared one of Chris's patients to be discharged and transported back to Surrey pretrial, while another patient was due to be admitted to that departing patient's bed. Chris made his way to the nursing station. This room held patients' charts and medications and had large windows to optimize viewing patient activity. He was greeted by head nurse Alex Dunbar, who at 6'2" and 220 pounds, commanded attention wherever he went. The two men engaged in small talk until Dr. Stevenson joined them. Alex introduced them to Carew, a second-year nursing student starting a preceptorship at the hospital, and explained that he'd suggested she sit in on the meeting after receiving Marvin's nod of approval. The four headed to an interview room to discuss Marvin. "How's Mr. Goodwin doing?" Marilyn asked. "He's keeping to himself," Alex replied. "I gave him an orientation to the unit about half an hour ago, showed him his room, the usual routine. I also did the intake assessment interview, or I should say I attempted to." "What do you mean?" Chris asked. "He couldn't answer many of the questions. He'd just repeat the last word or two of what I asked him. We've kept a close eye on him to make sure no one gives him a hard time." Dr. Stevenson looked at Chris. "Any luck with family?" He shook his head. "Nothing yet. I also spoke with probation and the RCMP, and neither has anything on him." With the preliminaries out of the way, Alex left the room to get Marvin, returning a few minutes later with the young man by his side. The differences between the two men were striking. Against Alex's large frame, Marvin appeared even shorter and thinner than he actually was. His hospital-issued blue sweats hanging loosely. His pale complexion contrasted starkly with the nurse's healthy coloring, and his long, unkempt brown hair looked like it hadn't been washed in days. Marvin looked around the room nervously, then kept his eyes downcast. Chris offered him a chair, and Marvin cautiously sat down. After introducing the team, Dr. Stevenson started the interview. "How are things going for you on the unit, Mr. Goodwin? Would you prefer Mr. Goodwin or Marvin?" No reply to either question. She continued. "Do you know why you've been admitted here?" Marvin offered no response other than a slight unintelligible mumbling under his breath. Chris suspected the young man was feeling intimidated by all the questions from strangers. An idea popped into his head. He pulled out a pen, its hard plastic casing removed so it couldn't be used as a weapon, and handed it to the young man. "Marvin, is it okay if I call you Marvin?" "Marvin," was the sole response. Chris handed him a blank piece of paper. "Maybe you can write down anything you'd like us to know about you, okay?" "Okay," the young man repeated mechanically. He scribbled something on the paper, then sat quietly with his hands folded. "Can I take a look?" Chris asked. Without any expression or eye contact, Marvin handed over the paper. On it, neatly printed, was the word home. "That's great, Marvin. Where is home?" "Home." "Can you write down your phone number?" "Phone number." To everyone's surprise, though, Marvin wrote down a local telephone number. "Do you live alone in your home, Marvin?" "Home." He gently put the pen down on the table and stared at it. Chris took this to mean that he was done for the day. "Is it okay if I take the sheet with your phone number?" "Phone number." The young man handed the paper to Chris without making eye contact. He then stood up to leave, and Alex escorted him back to his room. "Well, it's a start," Dr. Stevenson remarked. "A slow one, but a start nonetheless. At first glance, he doesn't look fit to stand trial." "It's hard to picture him carrying out that crime," Chris said. The psychiatrist nodded. "But that's for the police to sort out." Alex returned to the interview room. "So, what do you think we're dealing with here? He's obviously got some kind of cognitive problem." "I'd say Marvin's got a moderate degree of intellectual disorder. I also think he falls along the extreme end of autism spectrum disorder." She turned to Corrine, the nursing student. "ASD would explain Marvin's problems with social interactions and his communication challenges. Did you notice how he repeated the last few words of the questions he was asked?" Corrine nodded. "That's called echolalia. Repetitive behaviors and in some cases cognitive delays are also present with ASD. I'm going to have my work cut out for me with Marvin's assessment, but I'll also ask psychology to see him," Dr. Stevenson continued. "Hopefully he'll agree to some basic testing. It would also be very helpful to have background information from his family, Chris. Maybe the number he wrote down will help. Someone must be looking for him. I'll see what I can do. By the way, nice touch with the pen. He seemed to respond to your approach." "Thanks. I'm interested in finding out where this phone number leads me." In the next chapter, Chris dialed the number Marvin had written. After several rings with no response, he hung up. He was about to dial again when his phone rang. "You calling me?" a male voice on the other end demanded. I was looking for a family member for Marvin. Goodwin? Yes, are you a relative? Brief silence. Who are you? The man demanded again. I'm a social worker at the Institute of Forensic Psychiatry. Marvin's been admitted for a psychiatric assessment. He gave me this number. Are you his father, his brother? Yeah, Michael, his brother. I'm sorry to be talking with you under these circumstances. Unfortunately, your brother has been charged with a very serious offense. It's a bullshit charge. There's no way Marv would have done what they said he did. So you're aware of the charge? Hell yeah, it's been all over the news, but that doesn't mean it's true. He wouldn't hurt a fly. That's why I'm calling, to find out what I can about your brother. Marvin hasn't been able to give us much information. I can tell you we didn't kill anyone. Okay, Michael, but that's part of a police investigation and I'm not involved with that. Our job is to see if your brother is fit to stand trial. You don't understand. Marv shouldn't have been charged in the first place. It ain't fair. His whole life, people have called him stupid and retarded. Now they're calling him a killer. You've got to help him. The man shouted into the phone. All right, I hear you. Time to change tactics, Chris thought. Look, Michael, I want to help your brother, but to do that, I need to know more about him. For example, does he have a family doctor? There was a long pause. Marv hasn't seen a doctor in years. Okay, do you remember the name of the doctor who last saw him? Yeah, it was some guy named Bond, like in those movies. Do you remember how long ago that might have been? Marv was a kid, that's all I remember. Does Marvin have a team working with him, like a psychiatrist or home care? Another long pause. I gotta go. Listen, tell him Marv is innocent. You gotta do that for him. He doesn't deserve to go to jail. He'll die in there. Have you seen him? Have you actually met him yet? Yes, I was with him just a few minutes ago. He's settling in well with the unit. No one is hassling him, right? He doesn't deserve shit from no one. Marvin's okay. He's on a unit where there are staff to help him. And he gave you my number. Go figure, he must have liked you or something. Oh yeah, make sure he gets the Tribune every day. He reads the sports section, especially about the Canucks. He has a thing for reading player stats. As long as he has a paper, he'll be fine. And paper to color. He likes to color. Take good care of him, okay? The line went dead. Chris sat perplexed about the conversation he just had, a conversation that left him with more questions than answers. At least now, though, he had somewhere to start, Dr. Bond. He Googled medical offices with physicians on staff named Bond, which narrowed his search to 3 clinics in the Vancouver area. He called the offices and his efforts paid off. The second medical clinic confirmed having Marvin's childhood medical records archived, and the receptionist agreed to fax them to the number Chris provided. Pleased that he'd accomplished something, he prepared to leave work for the day, but first he called Alpha Unit to pass on the information about Marvin liking the Tribune. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd only scratched the surface of the Goodwin case. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. I have ADHD, so the concept of not being able to communicate effectively with police officers in a stressful situation and the world being too much for your processing is one of the scariest things I can imagine. And yeah, I the way it's handled in the book is, I really enjoy isn't the right word, but I appreciate how well that's handled, having a non-normative brain. Like, the ability to speak off the cuff, good in this job, bad when you're angry with an authority figure sometimes. So I appreciated it.
Thank you.
Thanks for reading. And pop up my notes again. Remember, everyone, we have one question so far in the chat area. I have written questions, but I would love to hear your questions if you guys have any. So everyone who has one, throw it in the question box. As I said, I've gotten really into baseball lately. Batting closer tonight, or pitching closer, I don't know if you bat closer, is AJ Devlin. AJ grew up in Greater Vancouver and studied screenwriting. After working in Hollywood for many years, he moved back to Port Moody and began work on Cobra Clutch, the first and award-winning entry to the Hammerhead Jed series. In 2020, the sequel, Rolling Thunder, was released, and the third is on its way. AJ has been befriending NeWest Press authors. Some of them are attending the event, and he's been incredibly supportive of their work. So everyone, welcome AJ.
Thank you, Claire. And thank you to the team at NeWest and Derek and Mark and Neil, you handsome devil. It's always a pleasure to be hanging out with you guys. And this is fun. I want to say hi to Jacqueline Dawn, star author of the NeWest book, The Inquirer, who's tuned in. And then I got to give a special shout out to the man, the next big thing in crime fiction, J.T. Siemens, whose book, To Those Who Killed Me, is coming out with NeWest in 2022. And there he is. And do yourself a favor and pick that up when it comes out, because it'll blow your socks off. Anyway, so yeah, so I'm reading from Rolling Thunder tonight, and it's the sequel to Cobra Clutch, and it follows the story. It's a direct sequel to the story about an ex-professional wrestler turned amateur or turned detective, Hammerhead Jed Ounstead. And in Rolling Thunder, he's now a licensed private investigator, and he's hired by a women's roller derby team to find their roller derby coach who goes missing right before playoffs. And I'm going to read from chapter 4 tonight. So he starts looking into this guy, this roller derby coach being missing, and he finds out he was quite the gambler and that he had a bookie. And so he tracks the bookie down to the Hastings racecourse. And he's a very peculiar upscale gentleman bookmaker, and he has a yen for racing Dachshunds, which is a real thing in Vancouver. They have wiener dog races. So that's why I busted out my my wiener dog tie for tonight. You can see the little Dachshunds there because I can't help myself. And yeah, so all you really need to know is he's been hired by the roller derby team to find their coach, and he's tracked down his bookmaker, and he may or may not be able to point him in a direction to find the missing roller derby coach. The thoroughbred whinnied loudly, then stood on its hind legs and reached for the sky with its front hooves. The white stallion's mane rippled as a gust of wind suddenly passed by, and it took all the restraint I had not to hoist my large banana milkshake in the air and shout, "Hi-yo, Silver, away!" The steed's front hooves landed back on the track, and in a flash it began to kick up dirt as the horse took off like a shot around the oval raceway, while the little jockey stood up in the saddle, kicking his heels and coaxing the magnificent beast to run faster. Sunlight suddenly broke through a shifting cloud and lit up Hastings racecourse. The sun had been playing peekaboo, as was often the case in Vancouver, and the weather had been in flux. I turned my back to the track and bounded up a stairway until I reached the man sitting by himself in the 10th row. The rest of the stadium was empty, save for the few horses and jockeys warming up on the racecourse. The man wore aviator sunglasses and a crisp navy blue blazer over top of a pair of khaki pants, and his jet black hair was slicked back. He looked calm and comfortable as he sat with his legs crossed and held a small reddish Dachshund in his lap, slowly and repeatedly stroking the little dog's floppy ears. "Sykes?" I asked. "Mr. Ounstead, I presume," he replied, still watching the horses. "How do you know who I am?" "My colleague, whom I understand regularly takes wagers from your cousin, alerted me that I would likely be receiving a visit from you soon." Sykes turned his head and looked at me, giving me the once-over. "I've never cared for professional wrestling. Its scripted storylines make it a pointless event on which to bet. At least with boxing, there remains an element of unpredictability. I don't wrestle much anymore." "That's not what I've heard." "It's a bit complicated." I motioned to the red plastic seat next to him. "Do you mind?" Sykes considered my request for a moment before nodding and returning his gaze to the track. The Dachshund was skittish and jumpy in Sykes's lap as I took a seat next to him. Sykes continued to stroke the nervous little dog and stare out at the racecourse. I took a big sip of my banana milkshake before speaking. "Nice wiener dog," I said, finally, breaking the silence. "I loathe that term," replied Sykes. "Napoleon here is a purebred Dachshund. He comes from a long line of hunting dogs that were experts at flushing out badgers and other burrow-dwelling animals. Referring to him as a wiener dog is an insult to his lineage." Sykes was stroking the dog all the way from his head to his mid-back now. The cute canine looked proud and stared at me as if it knew his owner was defending his honor. "No offense intended," I said. Sykes let out a big sigh and exhaled forcefully. "It's not your fault. I blame pop culture for branding these amazing animals with such a silly name." "I would imagine one doesn't usually find Dachshunds at horse races," I said, "unless it's summertime in Vancouver. How's that?" "The annual Dachshund Championships." "A dog show?" "Racing, Mr. Ounstead. You mean these little Dachshunds actually race each other?" Sykes smiled, revealing a mouthful of bright white veneers. They do indeed. Top prize this year is a $10,000 purse, and that is in addition to any wages I may take. Napoleon is set to make me a lot of money. As if on cue, the dog yipped and sat up in Sykes's lap. Sykes hushed the pooch. As it sat back down, he produced a treat from his pocket and fed it to the racing hound. I take it you are not here to bet on my little friend, Sykes asked as he resumed stroking the dog. I'm here about Lawrence Kunslinger, I replied. Sykes's face lit up again. Lawrence, he said, dragging out the pronunciation of his name. One of my favorite clients. Always pays his debts. Always pays them quickly. He's gone missing. Sykes removed his aviator sunglasses, and clipped them to his white polo shirt he was wearing underneath his navy blue blazer. His ice blue eyes sparkled as a smug smirk crept across his face. Perhaps he simply does not want to be found, said Sykes slyly. You know where he is, don't you? Sykes returned his gaze to the racecourse. More chestnut brown horses ridden by jockeys trotted out onto the track. I do not, but I may have a way to contact him. How? He hasn't been answering his cell phone in over a week. No, he simply hasn't not been answering that particular cell phone in over a week. I mulled over the nugget of information Sykes had offered. After a moment, I figured it out. Lawrence is using a burner, I said, now realizing what my missing roller derby coach was up to. The son of a bitch is still placing bets with you, isn't he? Sykes' mouth formed into a smug smirk again as he nodded slightly. I was a bit stunned. It dawned on me that because of the trashed apartment and creepy gray-suited peeper, I had been leaning toward the possibility that Lawrence may have been caught up in some kind of foul play. Instead, for whatever his reasons, the guy had booted it out of Dodge of his own volition. I need the number for that burner, I said. And I need you to listen to a proposition first, replied Sykes. I hesitated before answering, wondering just how cautious I need to be with a character like Sykes. After a moment, I responded. Go ahead. Sykes took a deep breath and gave Napoleon another treat. The little guy gobbled it up out of Sykes' hand faster than a duck being offered a piece of bread. Unfortunately, the mother of an associate of mine recently had a stroke. As a result, this associate is out of commission for the time being. However, I still need the services he typically provides, and I need them now. If you were able to help me with said service, I would gladly compensate you for your efforts with a number for Mr. Kunslinger's new mobile phone. You want to use me as an enforcer. I want you to simply collect some money that is owed to me. I'm not a goon for hire. I never said you were, but let's be honest, a man with your size, smarts, and wrestling ability, well, surely you have the skill set required to coerce a stubborn individual into squaring away his debt. Don't try and butter me up, Sykes. Who owes you this money? A man by the name of Dale Forrester. He's a longshoreman down at the port of Vancouver, a foreman actually. Needless to say, he makes very good money. Good money that translates into wages with you. Exactly. Forrester, well, he works hard, then he lives hard. And you'd like me to have a chat with him? I would like you to collect from him. This Friday is his payday. And on the following day, as he does every second Saturday of the month, he visits a certain club, engages in a variety of activities, and more often than not, blows through the bulk of his paycheck. And you want me to collect the debt he owes you before this happens? Indeed. I slurped back on the last of my banana milkshake and watched as the jockey hopped off his steed and comforted his nervous horse, momentarily spooked by a car backfiring in the parking lot. I contemplated Sykes' offer before finally making my decision. How much does he owe? I asked. $4,200, Sykes replied. And he'll have that on him? He will. When and where? The Graf Zeppelin nightclub in Gastown this Saturday, anytime after 9 p.m. Forrester always stays until closing. I reached out a hand and slowly gave the Dachshund's head a scratch. He looked up at me with big brown eyes, then licked his chops, apparently having grown accustomed to my presence. Have Lawrence's number ready, I said, before standing up and walking toward the stairs. Mr. Ounstead, said Sykes. Yes? This particular club, well, it is safe to say that it caters to a certain type of clientele. I encourage you to proceed with caution. I nodded confidently towards Sykes, despite wondering what kind of situation I was entering. And that is chapter 4 from Rolling Thunder.
Thanks, AJ. You reminded me of, like, I'm English, Irish in background, and my mom's working class English from London, Irish background as well, she found out. Well, she knew, but she found out genetically. I have 2 languages in my head because of it a lot of the time.
Oh, really?
And we're like, for example, my partner, we were reading an IMDb of an actor, like an actor bio, and it said his dad was a bookkeeper. and my partner, who doesn't have a working class English background, was like, oh, he took care of the books. That's posh, right? Like, and I was like, no, he was a bookie. Like, bookkeeper. That's the full for bookie.
Yes.
And it reminded me of like how you have to play with like Canadian, because it's a Vancouver book, but you have a very Irish character, and how you have to play with the dialects in it, and like how you have two languages in your head in a certain way because of it. And I've always admired how well you've done that in the book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, it's definitely an older profession. And what was fun about writing this character of Sykes is to sort of glam him up a bit and make him a bit mysterious and a bit upscale, and just sort of the inverse of sort of maybe like the sleazy bookie that you're used to seeing in like movies and TV shows. And he sort of just snowballed and became, and then as the book progresses, him and the main character, Hammerhead Jed, they kind of develop this mutual respect and, borderline friendship. And that's one of the most fun things for me, is when you create a character and you have an idea of where it's going to go, but then organically things start happening as you write, and then you wind up with something you didn't anticipate.
It's always good to like take the cliche and
Flip it.
Yeah. And that's fun. I had an uncle who owned a pawn shop, and he was my fanciest uncle. Like, he wasn't my uncle who failed at other enterprises.
I bet he had some stories, though. I bet he had some good stories.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I won't tell them this is being recorded. So, but yeah, he had some good stories. Yeah. We have some questions, mostly from Jacqueline, who I'm just going to ask her to write questions for all my events because they're so good. So let me scroll up. I love scrolling when I've asked for questions. It means the event has got a lot of questions. So first question is from Mark. Jacqueline says, I don't think I've read a book like yours before, Mark. I'm intrigued by the photos and the question of ownership. If I read it correctly, the blurb online says this is a prequel. Why did you write it second if it takes place first?
It happened that way because I wrote the book mainly with two things in mind. One was the interaction between people and visual imaging technology. I'd had something like that in the back of my mind for some time. And the other was that the character of George Rabbani was a very minor character in Where the Bodies Lie. He made a kind of cameo appearance, but the more I thought about him, the more I thought he must have an interesting background. So I started writing with that in mind, and it turned into a prequel. I didn't really set out intending to do that, but that's just how it came about.
Yeah, it's hard because like I can totally see, it reminds me of some of the anthology TV shows where you pick up from another character. I watched the chess one about the young female chess player. And there's a secondary character in that. I'm like, if they ever make a second season, I think it's a standalone. I'm like, I want to know what happened to that character. And I can totally see how you're invested in the world. And it's hard to put the world away if you still have questions about any of the secondary characters.
Yeah, I just, I very much think of the book as a collision of characters. And for me, as with Where the Bodies Lie, it was very much a book about place, but there were more characters in Image Decay. And I thought of it as these characters interacting with one another, all pursuing their own ends for their own purposes. Rabbani just for me was an intriguing person to want to explore further.
It makes total sense to me. So question from JT. This for all the authors, or any of them, if you don't, again, we're not dictatorial. If you don't have an answer, you don't have an answer. How much time do you spend on research and planning before just launching into a first draft? I have a very squeaky chair, please ignore that.
Well, I know for me, it kind of depends on sort of the setting or the backdrop. Independent wrestling, I knew a lot about professional wrestling, but the indie scene's quite different. So I did quite a bit of research out here in Vancouver, and I was able to go to a lot of shows, which was nice. And then roller derby, that was the one where I had to do more research because I had no frame of reference for that. But I ended up, turns out I went to high school with a girl, and we lost touch and we reconnected. And she's also a journalist and at a newspaper. So you couldn't have a better person to give you feedback, a roller derby star / journalist. And so I did quite a bit of research there, and just like little things, like, because in my original first draft, it said, oh, when you know, the character mentions like, oh, when we, you know, when I was in roller derby, whatever, and they don't call it roller derby, they don't call it the derby, they just call it derby. So like back when I played derby, and just like little touches and slang and stuff, I definitely did more. But it kind of depends on, at least for me, with this character going into these sort of unique subculture, it depends on my level of familiarity. But once I sort of feel well versed in it, and I feel like you know, I got a handle on it, then I usually get going. And then along the way, I've been very fortunate to have, you know, people to come in, like, you know, wrestlers or roller derby players, or my neighbor's a retired police officer, and they come in and they give me that feedback, and they help me shape it and make it accurate. And yeah, so you know, you want to try and get it. If someone's going to be generous enough to come on a journey in, you know, our imagination, it's nice to try and get it as accurate as possible. But it kind of varies from book to book for me.
Forgot to unmute. It doesn't surprise me with like how generous you've been with the NeWest Press authors, that people in your life have been generous with their time. That's not a shock to me.
Pay it forward, right?
Yeah, and we have one of our designers is in roller, like did roller
Yes.
derby for years.
Pain Ears. Or,
Yeah,
handle.
great name.
Yeah.
I was at a party once with some roller derby people, and everyone else made up names. Mine would be Sylvia Rath after Sylvia Plath. That would have been mine.
That's awesome. I dare say the names in roller derby are even better than the names in wrestling. And wrestling has some good ones, but roller derby is just over the top. It's
my
it's
new
fantastic.
obsession with baseball is partially giving all the players nicknames. And I think you've picked the two sports with nicknames. I am looking for the dog, like the Westminster Dog Show one, like the Dog
Right.
Show Hammerhead mystery book, and you can give the dogs nicknames.
Yes, I got that's on my list. I got to do a dog show, and I got to work on some luchadors. So that's the fun thing about the character, is that with him always going unique subcultures, there's just seems to be an endless amount of places to take the character. But no, I mean, depending on where the character goes, you want to do your research. And but it's fun. It's fun learning about, you know, these worlds that you don't know about. And I just started working on a reading through Horseplay, which was a book that NeWest released. It's just phenomenal. And it's about a Vancouver police officer, you know, in his time undercover in Vancouver in like the 80s or 70s and 80s. And it's just a remarkable story. So anybody that's into, even if you're not really into true crime fiction, if you're in any kind of crime fiction, I highly recommend picking it up. It's just riveting. It's a riveting read.
The reviews have said it worked, like he's using sort of mystery and thriller,
Yeah.
like creative nonfiction, like you use some of the creative writing to make the story cohesive and intriguing to readers. But I will say, what I like about the book is it's very empathetic. Like It's not, right now it is challenging to become invested in a police narrative for people my age or
right.
younger. But this is not what this is. It's a different, it's on the side of the characters.
Yeah, it's like a familiar genre, but it's like a breath of fresh air
Sure.
at the same time.
So we have some more questions from Jacqueline, who I owe you a coffee, Jacqueline. She has a very nice note about buying extra copies of Only Pretty Damned and Rolling Thunder as gifts. Thank you. As the marketing person at NeWest Press, I approve.
Jacqueline's the best.
She has a question for Neil. Have you been asked about writing a sequel to Only Pretty Damned? If you want to write a sequel, Neil, write it. We'll talk. Would this be something you would consider? She's asking this carefully to avoid spoilers to the book because, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, I've kind of toyed with the idea. My mind is sort of elsewhere right now, but I've kind of toyed with the idea of revisiting some of the characters and kind of having them pop up in other things, just because there's certain characters that I really enjoyed and that I wouldn't mind exploring a little bit further, whether, I mean, like Mark did with the prequel, or just kind of having them pop up in things down the road. But that's sort of down the road. I know I've kind of got my sights set elsewhere right now, but yeah, I would not say never to that.
The other option is what Mark did with the secondary character. Is there a secondary character who's like stuck in your teeth sort of thing?
Yeah, there's a couple of those actually that I've thought of too, or someone who may have only even been around for like a chapter of Only Pretty Damned and kind of going, well, what's that guy up to 20 years down the road sort of thing. Because I have a lot of, I'm not a very heavy plotter, so I think I have a lot more fun with scenes that have to do with just, character driven stuff. So a lot of the times, even very periphery characters like a bartender or a waitress, for example, or there's a character that sells my protagonist a suit that is only around for like 2 pages, but those I find are the ones that kind of stick with me a little bit more. So I wouldn't put it past me to kind of go back to the well a couple more times, but that would be later.
Yeah, I don't know whose mind is as keen as before the pandemic. Like, I know mine is like other things, and I know you teach, and I know like even announcements in Calgary for teachers right now. Like there was a new announcement today. Like
20 minutes before this, I'm like, oh, I'm back home. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're safe.
Me too.
So next question, AJ, if you have it off the top of your head. If not, I opened the production calendar to double check.
Yes.
When is the third?
It is scheduled for 2022, and I'm about 1/3 of the way through the rewrites, or the first rewrite right now, and it's going really well. It's a lot of fun. Anytime I get to step foot in that universe is just a treat, and yeah, so no, it's going really well, and I'm going to try and get her done as fast as possible, and then work with the team at NeWest and my editor and everybody, but as of now it's scheduled for 2022, which means I get to ride the coattails of JT Siemens and hopefully do events with this guy, because he's going to be the rock star, and I'll just be like Ozzy Osbourne, old and limping on his hip. Riding on his coattails.
No biting the heads off bats, though.
No biting the heads off bats. But no, yeah, as of now, 2022. So I'm excited about that, because it'll mean that because Cobra Clutch came out 2018, Thunder 2020, and then the third book, the title is 5 Moves of Doom, and that's going to be 2022.
And I'll specify fall 2022.
Yes, fall 2022.
Unfortunately, Jacqueline, that does mean you will have to buy some of our other books for Father's Day gifts. Email me if you need recommendations. Horseplay.
Get Horseplay.
So Marcy has a question for the authors. We are frequently told we should write what and where we know. Do you agree with that, or do you think it should be ignored?
I can take a shot at it. So, I mean, with my books, I've come from the write what you know perspective, in that I work at a forensic psychiatric hospital, and the protagonist comes from that work environment as well. And so that's very helpful. Going back to the question that JT asked earlier about research, I'm able to really kind of look at it from through that lens and apply it. But I also think it's good to have a fresh perspective. And so with the third book, which is a follow-up to The Weight of Blood, part of the scene or part of the action takes place in a courthouse, and a lot of the patients that Chris Ryder would work with would leave the hospital to go to court. So that's a natural progression there, but it's not, the courthouse is not something that I'm all that familiar with in terms of the intricacies of it. And so I'm really looking forward to doing the research with that. And I've, just in terms of the court etiquette and the whole process about how a murder trial or how certain trials go about. And so that piece I'm looking forward to getting some research with a few lawyers that I have in mind. But so I think there could be an advantage to writing from what you know, but also keeping it fresh and venturing out into different avenues as well.
That makes, because yeah, I think of my poetry and I think about the novel I've been working on for far too long. And like, I'm not a woman with superpowers, and I'm not someone yet living in a post-apocalyptic desert society, but the emotions that I'm connecting with are the emotions I've felt, like made more extreme usually because I don't have superpowers or the consequences of superpowers. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think all novels or all books are true if they're good, but what type of truth are you playing with? Mark, do you have I'm pulling the school teacher, like I'm picking people now.
I'm not really keen on writing a lot about things I don't know about. It's much more comfortable to have some grasp of the reality you're writing about. The other thing is that I do tend to concentrate, as I said, on characters and place, and that means that I don't have to think so much about the other things that are going on. In Image Decay, I did write about some ideas about imaging technology, but those were things also I'd been looking at for some time. So really it was some of the peripheral details that I had to look up, and I would tend to try to keep the research limited to that kind of level.
And I know I was a bit of a jerk where I was like, when does this take place? What's the technology that would be? I was a real stickler
It's a
because
horrible anachronism, so thank you for that.
well, but it's if you write in a more fantastical genre, if you don't get those right, people won't take the leap with you into the fantastical.
Yeah, I
And
think
like,
there's some leeway, but you can't really be outrageously wrong on facts.
yeah. And I like, first, there was a question about starting your project. Like I have a tendency to do the lazy thing, and I'll write the stuff that's closest to me first. And then anything that needs research, I have ADHD. I will procrastinate like a champion. World's best procrastinator. So that's all the questions from the audience, but I do have two sets of questions. So you've all written more than one book. Neil submitted his second novel, There Are Wolves Here Too, great title, to us, yay. My question is, was writing the second book different than writing the first book, either in process or emotionally? Sort of a sub-question for everyone except Neil. With your second books coming out during the pandemic, has there been any silver lining to having to change how you are able to promote your book? Let's go with Derek. He's been quiet for a while.
Yeah, having it released through a pandemic, I mean, obviously the pandemic puts everything in perspective. When you're writing a book and you're putting so much energy into it, you can't wait to have to see it come alive and to be able to go to live events and to do all those kind of things, conferences and engaging with other writers and with readers and all of those kind of things. And so you don't have that ability in a live venue, but putting in life in perspective, you know, that's one thing for me anyway, and that's, you just adapt, you know, as with all other aspects with the pandemic, you have to adapt. And so having said that, it's been great to do virtual events. Before the pandemic, I don't think I'd ever done anything, you know, virtual, and now through work, everything is virtual through Skype and Zoom, and same thing with book events. And so it's really, really great to see how, you know, the book industry and booksellers and publishers, how they've adapted that way to make these types of events possible. And so that's the silver lining, is whatever, you know, basic kind of conflict we get thrown at us, we do our best to adapt.
And did your first book feel different than your second book in the writing process? I know the inspiration may have been different, like, because your first book, you have such a great story about why that came about. And
yeah, I guess I would say that I learned a lot from the first book and really tried to apply that, because the first one, there were a lot of firsts with that for me, and a lot of really good experiences with it. And I just wanted to sort of learn from those experiences to apply to the second. And so I'm very happy with how the second one turned out because of that. And again, paying it forward with the third one that I'm working on now, really sort of applying what I've learned there. I just feel like as a writer, continually evolving. It's not like I feel like, okay, I know everything there is to know. I'm continually learning and evolving, and so that's exciting.
And yeah, like that makes, like, I keep saying that makes sense, because like this, the thing about hosting these events is, as a first time, like someone trying to write their first novel, I'm just trying to pick your brains to figure out how to proceed. So I appreciate everyone's answers here. AJ, what about you? How did it feel between the first and the second?
Yeah, well, the first part of the question, I mean, I was a big fan of like Chandler and Mickey Spillane, and so I was trying to write like pulp fiction in Vancouver with like wrestlers and snakes. And what I didn't anticipate was it becoming, or humor becoming such an intrinsic part of the series. And but it actually makes sense, because it's you know, that's a big part of professional wrestling. And you know, there's over the top in-ring theatrics, and then there's, you know, behind the scenes, outside the ring, you know, dark underbelly of things that happen. And so I feel like writing the first one, I sort of discovered the voice of the series, and then it's a little grittier and more violent. And then so with Rolling Thunder, I wanted to go in sort of a different direction. And so I definitely leaned harder into the comedy and the humor with the second one. And then I just sort of started thinking of the series as a mystery comedy. And then with the third one, I'm going back toward a little grittier, because it's set in the world of local mixed martial arts. So humor, I've learned, or I've just, you know, I've come to the conclusion, like, humor needs to be sort of a constant with the series, but it took sort of cranking out those first two books and seeing the differences to figure out sort of its identity. And so, you know, you can sway back and forth in terms of you know, grittiness, or you know, how intense it can get, but like there's certain constants that I always want to have with regards to the series. And then to answer the second part of the question, the silver lining, I had locked down like a book tour. I was ready to go. I was had everything good. They were about to start brewing a cross promotional red ale at a brewery here in Port Moody for the event, and then it all got shut down. And so I had like a, you know, 24-hour pity party, and it's like, oh man. And then because after rolling Cobra Clutch, I was like, oh, I know how to do this now. And then it was like, boom, pivot to a virtual tour. But then I realized pretty quick, like, how lucky are we that we still get to, you know, with Zoom and technology and virtual events, like, we still get to promote our work. We still get to celebrate it. We still get to talk about it. We still get to be passionate about it and have a platform. And so I went very quickly from feeling like, oh man, that sucks, to being like, how lucky am I that I still get to do this? And what a welcome distraction. especially at the beginning of the pandemic when, you know, people are like, oh yeah, it's just going to be 4 weeks at home and then everything will be fine. And so it was a blessing in disguise. And yeah, so, but so I guess in a silver lining, it was, it gave me something to do, and it was exciting, and it was thrilling, and yeah, just a lot of Zoom. I mean, I lost my voice like 3 times in the last year because of all the
I remember
events and
that.
stuff. Yeah, of all the events I've been doing, and like my lunch, because like, you know, you go to a brewery, you do a lunch, you know, people come up and you chit chat and you take a photo and you sign books and you talk, and it's super casual and relaxed. Or you go to chapters and you do a signing, but like you do a launch on Zoom, you know, and you're talking for 90 minutes. It's like a stand-up set. Where you're just talking and talking and talking and getting your questions coming in via Facebook Messenger. Like Isabel did that, and you were doing that with Isabel. And so it's just a different experience. But you know what? The way the world is, and after this whole experience, I don't think it's going to go back. Even if, you know, things are back to normal, you know, in,
It's
you
gonna
know,
take
however
a while.
much time.
At least.
But even if we're right back to where we were pre-pandemic, I think there's been so much positive stuff with virtual events. I don't think we're ever going to go back to where it is. I think it'll be more of a combination of live events, personal events, but also I think Zoom events and virtual events and panels are around to stay. And so I'm grateful for this experience. But so it's 2 completely different ways to launch a book. But you know, that's 2 completely different skill sets that you can kind of combine. And so yeah, so I'm just hoping things are, you know, stable and you know, no more normalish come you know, come 2022. And then but I really enjoy this. It's fun. I mean, you know, it's pretty cool just to sit at home and just be able to log in and, you know, talk about work and talk about your writing and read with other authors. And so yeah, so I don't see the landscape ever going back. I think it's going to be sort of an amalgam moving forward.
And I will say, like, as someone who's lived on the East Coast, grew up in Ontario, and now lives in Alberta, oh boy, is it easier to connect with my people back east with these online events than having to take 2 flights to get to Fredericton.
Right?
It's, or a flight to Toronto and then have my mom drive across the city to pick me up during an ice storm, which was like one of the times I went home. There is stuff. I know at NeWest Press, we're planning on continuing to integrate both
Yes.
online and in person.
I think that's the way to go, you know, and it's exciting.
And truthfully, AJ, you were never one of the authors we worried about talking to people through a screen.
Yeah, that's never a problem. If you ever need me to fill some time, just give me a call.
And so final question for the night, and then I have some closing, and then I know Shelf Life Books has some closing. For our authors, if they were to make a movie, because I asked you this at the beginning, I gave you guys heads up and I don't want to leave you hanging. If a movie or TV show were to be made of your most recent book, which actors from any time period would play the main characters or the main 2 characters? I have answers, except for one, because I couldn't, the accent, I had a question about accents. But you guys give your answers and I will give the correct answer afterwards.
This is going back to Matt and I had talked about this when my book first came out, but I'm just piggybacking on one of his suggestions. If the premise was it was any living or dead actor, and he had suggested, I think it was Burt Lancaster for
because he did the circus movie already.
He is, and he, I think, was a former acrobat. So I was kind of, I mean, I can't even.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, oh yeah, I know. And
your answer is right. I have 2 for Toby. Michael Shannon. I think if you're going contemporary, I just think, especially for the him in clown makeup would be fascinating.
And terrifying.
Yeah.
And terrifying for sure. Yeah, great grimace for it.
And we were talking about John Garfield. If it was a classic noir, John Garfield in clown makeup as well, he has a sad face. I think it would be.
Yeah, he does. Either would be good. Next time I'm working on the old necromancy, I'm going to see who I can channel, and whoever pops
up. He should be brought back. He went so young.
Yeah, I think he'd have a kick in this day and age. I'd enjoy it. Yeah.
AJ, you're already on screen. You might as well answer.
Yeah, no problem. I think contemporary is probably what I've given the most thought to. But like for Hammerhead Jed, I never would have thought of him because he's always, I mean, he's a very muscular physical guy, and I would want a character that, you know, sort of embrace, you know, represents
That
that
is a
sort of
challenge now.
that physicality. But it wasn't until I watched him host Saturday Night Live, and his comic timing was phenomenal, and I couldn't believe how funny he was because he doesn't do a lot of humor, and it was Jason Momoa, and he was phenomenal. He did this sketch, he did a number of sketches, and he was so funny and so he was just so poised, and his humor was just deft, and he just had the perfect touch. And but he's also he's like the right age, and he's the right build, and so, but I mean, I'd be open to anybody. I just think comic timing is going to be an important part for that character. And then for Declan, it's hard for me not to think of like a Colin Farrell, or
that's who I had at first.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm open to anybody. But like, it's just you know, Declan is just pure id. Like he's a constant, and he just does what he wants when he wants. You know, Jed goes through the series, and he grows, and he changes, and he evolves. And you know, Declan just doesn't. He's just the same. You know,
The
hard
actor who
drinking.
played Cassidy, though, maybe typecasted if he played it, but Cassidy from what was the TV show?
Oh, from Preacher.
Yeah,
that guy would be great. There's actually a wrestler in AEW who's a ginger, and because he's lean, and he wears aviators. He's kind of stylish. He's you know, and that's sort of it. So it's more about like the essence of the character. And then I love the you'd want the chemistry to be there as well. But
the challenge I had with Declan for this answer is he Northern Irish or is he Southern Irish? Like, is he like Ireland?
That's a good question, and I've sort of been intentionally vague about it. But
I've been watching Dairy Girls, and that is and I'm very particular about accents.
Well, my grandmother, my grandfather on my father's side were born in Ireland. My grandmother was born in she was born in Ireland below Belfast, and then my grandfather was born in Ballymena, which is above Belfast. And they both immigrated to and so they were like, you know, very close to each other. They never knew each other. They immigrated to Edmonton, actually. I don't know if I ever told you that. And then they met there, and he was Protestant, she was Irish Catholic. And they you know, now I have my dad, and I have 10 aunts and uncles.
That's how that happens.
But
I looked up Kelly recently. My last name's Kelly, to find out where we're from, and they're like, they don't know. There's just so many of us. I'm thinking I'd probably put him around Dublin area-ish. That's what I was thinking. That's why Colin Farrell made sense. And I'd want him to be like have have a familiarity with you know, Belfast. And I was fortunate enough to go to both tour all of Ireland. But like, if I were to stick him down in south in Cork or all the way in Galway, it's just a bit disconnected, you know, and especially given his history with the Irish Republic Army and everything. I'd sort of want him to be around that. But I haven't really figured that out. But I am building toward a book that the majority of it takes place in Ireland, and we explore Declan's history. I just haven't figured it out yet. Irish Whip. The Irish Whip. That's right. Very good. Jed, Tom Hardy. I had Tom Hardy. Oh yeah, Tom absolutely. Hardy from Bronson era specifically. Just as long as he doesn't do the Bane accent, count me in. No, and that was my problem is he does non-talking grunty roles a lot, but I was thinking of the character from The Drop, like the Dennis Lehan movie. Yeah. Book movie. And he's because Jed is more like that with a fast-talking compatriot. Absolutely. So. And then if you actually, I mean, I know it's a silly, I mean, it's a superhero movie, and it's, you know, crazy space glue or goo and whatever, but there's a movie Venom, but if you actually watch it with Tom Hardy, there's a lot of humor in that movie that he does a lot of accents in that movie as well. He does a lot of accents, and he's jumping in lobster tanks, and he's a lot funnier than you might think initially. Watching his videos on YouTube where he's being interviewed, he's hilarious. Yeah, no, he's great. So I mean, those are my answers. So Mark, How about for George and Jack?
Well, I guess it would require an ensemble cast because there are a number of characters, but two of the main ones, George Rabbani is not that many years out of law school, tends to have a little trouble controlling his weight and has a kind of quizzical air about him, although he's also a pretty smart guy. The person I thought of was Jonah Hill for that character. Jack Ostrowski, he's kind of a nondescript guy, although he's kind of impish, provocative. I would tend to think of him more as something. He's a person who would be played by somebody who isn't very well known, a character actor who can project a personality really well. Maybe one of the great character actors in Hollywood from the 30s through the 50s. I think the main thing would be his appearance, kind of short, a little bit stocky.
I was thinking Bob Hoskins, man. Bob Hoskins, a la Mermaids.
I thought about Bob Hoskins. I think I'd want a guy with sort of bristly iron gray hair, though. That's what Bob.
Yeah, but I was also thinking Gordon Pinsent. That was my other option.
Gordon Pinsent.
Gordon
I
Pinsent's a
could see that.
Canadian legend.
And based on the last TV show I saw him in,
South?
even an older Paul Gross, although he's a little bit big for that character, I think.
Yeah, Gordon Pinsent played his ghost father in Due South, and he's a littler guy. So I was picturing that as well. Derek?
There are too many others to go through. So.
Yes, that's why I picked the main two.
Yeah, so for I think of Woody Harrelson for Ray Owens. Woody Harrelson, when he's got such range, a lot of people
His
see
dad
him as,
was a professional killer.
I did not know that, but I know that he's obviously played comic roles, and he's got, going back to Cheers and that kind of goofy, lovable character. But man, he's played some real menacing characters and really believable. And I could see him, I could kind of picture him, Ray Owens, in that kind of character. And for the protagonist, for Chris Ryder, I kind of think Ewan McGregor, as I could see him as this guy kind of trying to struggle to keep the moral compass straight. You could see him sort of with that inner turmoil and torment. I could sort of see that working.
I always picture Ewan McGregor. I figured out why he's a great actor is he projects concern. Like he's both concerned, but you're concerned for him. Yeah. And I think that really works well for that character. He's got great inner world as an actor, which for a character who is experiencing trauma and dealing with trauma, that's a great choice.
Thank you.
So finishing that up, I want to thank everyone for being here and to the authors for reading and for all your great questions. I'm just going to outline some upcoming events that we have at NeWest Press. April 19th, CJ Levine, Jacqueline Dawn, who asked some of those great questions, and John O'Neill will be reading. April 27th, we have two debut nonfiction authors who had substantial careers outside of writing will be reading. Anne Wheeler, who is an astounding Canadian director, and Norm Boucher, who wrote Horseplay, which we've been talking about. May 5th, we have a double launch of two brand new novels with a guest reader. Karen Hoffman writes these great sort of intricate family sibling story novels. And this is the sequel. And Kevin Hollowak, who is a young writer, a male writer, who has written female characters of different ages astoundingly. And I want to know which god he gave a sacrifice to make this happen so that I can sacrifice to that god to make my novel better. And Tracy Scoose, who is a short story writer and just some really taut short stories that turn on a dime. May 10th, we have another double launch with two historical novels this time by Daniel Neal and GG award-winning author Glenn Hooser. And both of those have World War I connections, which makes sense because it's just past the 100th anniversary. I've been thinking about World War I a lot. May 17th, Edmonton Poet Laureate Nisha Patel will launch her debut collection with guest read, and we've already gone to second print on that book, so you want to go to this event. With guest reader, multiple award-nominated Bertrand Bickerstaff. So it's another Edmonton-Calgary pair up for the Alberta people. And Glass Bookshop and Shelf Life Books will be on hand as the official bookseller there as well. And you can visit our website, newestpress.com. There's one W in that. And the events are on our event page with the links and everything. And while there, if you sign up for our newsletter this month, you have a chance to win an ebook version of one of my favorite NeWest titles, also a Calgary connection, Corinna Chong's Belinda's Rings. And she just today, her short story was longlisted for a CBC short story. So have a chance to win the book, sign up for the newsletter. It's an ebook, just to specify, because people got upset once when they didn't read that it was an ebook when it's an ebook. So thanks again, everyone. And as I always say at the end of events, remember, if you can, please continue to support small publishers and bookstores of any size. We wouldn't be here without you all. Good night.